week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. I think there's some comments that I haven't caught up with as yet, so I will do so as soon as I'm able to. Right, okay, so last week, big thank you to everybody that commented and I've spoken to about the voodoo whiskies. Seem to have generated quite a lot of interest. Big thank you to the Brave New Spirits for retweet my tweet and all that kind of stuff, and apparently it was the first UK review of the voodoo whiskies, so that's really cool. Always nice to be the first, so maybe this will be the first UK review of their other range, which is called the Rebels. Now, there's sort of three kind of sub-batches, I suppose, for want of a better word, within this Rebels concept. And so they have one called Treasures of the Warehouse, which are 12 to 16-year-old small batches and single barrel bottlings, classic maturation, so, bourbon, American oak, sherry, and classical finishes, port, etc, etc. Then they have a range called Cheeky Little Rascals, which are again small batches, single barrels, between 5 and 8 years of age. And then we have the range that I'm looking at today, which is called the Guerilla Casks. No idea why gorillas, but anyway, these are all again small batches, single barrel bottlings, 12 to 16-year-olds. With slightly unusual cask maturations and finishes. So it's all it's weird that that apparently they're not particularly happy with this range or the name of the range. There seems to be some, from what I was told, that this range may well not be continued after this set of releases, which is probably the first set of releases, which is bit weird, really, isn't it? You go all this time and trouble creating a range, and then you go, actually, no, we don't really like it. We're not going to do it anymore. I mean, maybe one of the directors had more influence over this range. I mean, certainly, I would suggest that Adam, who was obviously at Murray McDavid, seems to have the Murray McDavid influence here. This range, it's got more of that kind of cool, funky, sort of stuff going on, and maybe people have said it's a bit too much like Murray McDavid, and maybe they're going to go off in another direction. If it was me, I would kind of do some kind of extension to the voodoo whiskies. I mean, there's a million and one things really you could kind of offshoots from that, shall we say, because they really are quite cool. But anyway, the point being is, as I said last week, all the sort of labelling and frippery and all that kind of stuff is pretty much, is a bit of an irrelevance, really. What we're interested in is the juice in the bottle, and well, it's not really a great deal else to say, apart from probably about time to introduce the lineup and taste said juice, I think. Okay, you probably noticed missing glass again. Glass goblins are at it again. They returned them last week just to nick it again. Anyway, so today's lineup. So this is, like I said, these are called the Guerilla Casks. No idea why they're called the Guerilla Casks, but they are indeed called the Guerilla Casks. So the first bottling we'll be looking at is, and this range, because they're all small batches, predominantly single cask bottlings, but I think all of these are single cask bottlings. The name of the distillery, cask number, and all that kind of stuff is on the front label. So this is a 10-year-old Auchentoshan. It was distilled in April of 2010, bottled in March of 2001, full maturation in first fill masala cask, cask number 70427, bottled at 56.7% with a recommended retail price of $79.95. And you're probably going to go, oh my god, how much for a 10-year-old come on, this is, this is the times we live in. It's a 10-year-old, it's a single cask bottling, it's cask strength, yada yada yada. It's going to be relatively expensive because it's an unusual cask. Whether, of course, it's worth $79.95, of course, is another matter, of course. Okay, bottling number 2 is a 9-year-old Royal Brackla. So this was distilled in February 2012, bottled in March of last year. It's a first fill Banyuls casks, 493, bottled at 55.9%, with a recommended retail price of $78.95. Yes, it's a lot for a 9-year-old. Okay, so bottling number 3, this is one of my favourite distilleries, yes, really. It's good old Deanston. So this is an 11-year-old Deanston, distilled in September of 2009. Yes, I'm trying to keep a straight face. Bottled in June of 2021. Its entire maturation in a first fill Merlot barrique, number 116, bottled at 54.8, and having a recommended retail price of $79.95. If you want me to buy it for $79.95 for a Deanston, damn, it better be good. That's all I'm saying. Not prejudging or anything. Anyway, bottling number 3 is another one of my favourite distilleries. Cool, yeah, they're doing me a big favour here, aren't they? This is a Macduff. It's a 14-year-old Macduff, distilled in October of 2006, bottled in March of 2021, bottled at 51.4%, and it's a first fill Côte de Roussillon cask, cask number 350236, and they would want 80, or the retailer, should we say, would want $82.95 of your hard-earned pennies for it. And before we go on, I'd better say that any comments that I do make during today's episode of the show are wholly my own and have no bearing or relevance to the company that employs me. Just better in case. Right, so penultimate bottling is a 12-year-old Tobermory, or 12-year-old Leche, I should say. It is bottled at 51.5%, distilled in March of 2009, bottled in March of 2021. First fill Madeira cask, cask number 700-102, and this would set you back the princely sum of around $89.95. So at least we're looking at modern, hopefully cleaner Tobermory. And the final bottling of the day is Stoisha, the peated malt from Buna. It is 7 years old, distilled in October of 2013, bottled in April of 2021. Entire maturation in first fill Ecuadorian rum casks, I should say. Cask number 10444, bottle of 56%, and having a recommended retail price of $79.95. So that's a lineup. Some interesting stuff. Some of my favourite distilleries. And I'm quite looking forward to this. Lots of weird and wonderful cask finishes, and of course, not actually cask finishes, a whole maturation as far as I'm aware. So we could be looking at, well, I'm not going to say another word, I'm just going to sort of taste some Auchentoshan. Right, okay, so let's kick off with the Auchentoshan. So, 10 years old, Masala cask. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Very herbal, very winey, very masala. It's got a kind of sort of Langerton-esque sort of herbally kind of character, it has to be said. There's a touch of potpourri, a little bit of rose petal, touch of burnt toffee, coffee. It's got a lovely intensity, but it's pretty much all about the cask. I mean, you know, I often wonder why distillers and blenders do tend to do this to Auchentoshan, because it really does get swamped pretty quickly. I mean, the only one that I've ever come across that I think has worked really well was the distillery bottling Virgin Oak finish, or was it a Virgin Oak cask, I forget. which actually worked really well. But Auchentoshan really gets kind of swamped pretty quickly, and yeah, this is pretty swamped, it has to be said. Anyway, let's see what passes on. Big, winey, herbal, again, reminds me of Langton. Quite masked, quite alcoholic, short, intense, cask orientated. There's a little bit of that sort of Auchentoshan strawberry mousse. I don't know, is it because I'm looking for it? Possibly. I can feel it and I can taste it. But again, it's all pretty much heavy masala. Very clean. Can't argue with the quality of it. But it is, like I said, it's very heavy on the masala cask. Let's see if the nose brings a little bit more balance. Yeah, well, it's kind of lessened the intensity of the masala cask, but it's kind of left sort of a rather neutral kind of nose. There's a little bit of kind of shredded wheat, I guess, but there's really not a lot else. There's sort of like, the cask is still there, it's giving it the sort of the winey sweetness and the dried fruit, but the spirit is not really saying an awful lot, if you see what I mean. See what pass on. It's okay. It's a little bit more sort of Weetabixy, burnt Weetabix, that kind of thing. Touch more tannin, a little bit more honey possibly. Again, there's not really a great deal of spirit character. It's pleasant. It's very masala, and to me doesn't quite have enough balance, and this is always a sort of an issue with malts like Auchentoshan. You know, they just don't sort of stand up to this kind of intensity of cask. Finishing maybe is a different matter, or sort of, you know, vatting together, but I often find that these kind of things, you know, fully matured in wine casks and stuff like that, it's just too much for poor old Auchentoshan, and it has to go and have a lay down. Anyway, let's move on, shall we say. Okay, so let's move on to the Royal Brackla. First Phil Banyul's cask. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Rich, honeyed, quite malty, quite barleyed. Touch of red fruit, a little bit of syrup, a little bit of an edginess there in it, almost kind of edgy, winey, honey kind of note. A little bit of dried fruit, a little bit of spice. Better balance than the Auchentoshan, but only marginally, it has to be said. I mean, Royal Brackla kind of has sort of a little bit more of a robustness of character, I suppose. So it's kind of standing up to this, and I am getting some distillery character. It has some good balance, and it works. Yeah, I like it. Let's see what passes on. That's drying. Combination of the alcohol and the tannins really is drying out the finish on that. A lot more cask, a lot more herbal red fruits, spicy red fruits. The spirit is underneath there. I can feel it. I can sense it. And it's desperately trying to come through, but the wine cask is again really dominant. There's a little maltiness on the aftertaste. It's okay. I'm hoping that maybe a little drop of water is going to give it a bit more sort of balance, a bit more equilibrium. The nose I thought was pretty well balanced. Palate a little bit more, too much on the dark side. Right, so this has dropped off the cask influence. I'm getting more of that malty, herbal honey, that kind of sort of raw Brackla character. And the winey notes are now sitting more in the background. I think that's far more intriguing, far more interesting. Let's see what the pale's like now. That's a lot better balance now. A lot more of the spirit character sort of coming through now. The wininess is sat in the background. Nice spiciness. That's a nice mouthful. Good length, really juicy. Again, you know, it just needs some water just to basically bring a little bit more balance back into that. But you know what? That's good. That's nice. Deanston time then. Let's see what the nose gives us on this first fill Merlot barrique. Yeah, that's Deanston. I mean, it's hard barley, it's sort of industrial, it's kind of, you know, it's, I mean, yes, I know they call the style traditional, the handles sherry and wine cask really well, and that's because, you know, bugger all is going to soften Deanston's character, I can tell you that for a start. Maybe you'd have to mix it with honey to actually get some softness there. Right, so you can't argue that this bottling doesn't display plenty of distillery character. There's probably going to be a lot of people going, oh, you're being too hard on Deanston. Well, I've not come across a bottling of Deanston yet that has got me actually sort of excited, it has to be said. It's the style, it really is. A little bit of green fruit, the green gauge sort of, you know, coming through. I'm actually not getting a great deal of kind of Merlot-y fruit. I would expect some black fruit, some, you know, that kind of thing, maybe some syrup, some wininess, but yeah, the Deanston is having none of that, and that's to be said. It's kind of well and truly sort of, that's called tea leaf now. Let's see what the parts like. That's got quite a tannic aftertaste as well. Touch more Merlot now. I'm getting that. Kind of comes in at the beginning, the sort of black fruit, and then Deanston basically stomps all over that, and it's industrial barley, straw, slightly herbal notes, a bit of stringency. Back comes the hard barley on the finish. Yeah, okay. I mean, you know, on the positive, you know, good balance, plenty of distillery character, can't complain about that. On the negative side, plenty of distillery character. I got to put a little drop of water with it. I don't think it actually really needed it. I mean, at least that sort of alcohol intensity kind of like, you know, anyway. Yeah, I'm getting a little bit more sort of creaminess from the oak now. Again, pretty much mainly distillery character. See what the pale's on. A little softer, the black fruit's a little sweeter. The alcohol dropping off has sort of allowed some of that sort of sweetness to come through, that slight syrupy note. Bit sugary on the finish, but there's an astringency there as well, so yeah, you can argue that the finish is quite balanced. Balanced but challenging, I think, would be an apt way of describing that particular whiskey, it has to be said. Not my cup of tea, but you know, still not a bad bottling. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Macduff. So, Cote de Roussillon finish. Lovely colour, has to be said. Pretty dark. Let's see what the nose gives us then, shall we? Okay, well, by Macduff standards, it's actually pretty clean. Again, hard barley, ginger, dark chocolate. It's got that sort of almost kind of raisinated dried fruit. But my God, that sort of, again, that hard, industrial, edgy character is just, you know, certainly well and truly noticeable. The wine cask again is sort of sitting in the background. A little bit of green spice, cardamom possibly. I mean, again, it's a really difficult one to love, it has to be said. It's expressive, it's got lots of distillery character, and again, like the Deanston, one has to say that's its downfall. See what the power's like. Again, like the Deanston, opens up the cask notes first, so it's winey, spicy red fruit, industrial barley comes through. But although it's only 51%, that alcohol really is masking the finish. I'm getting practically nothing after the mid palate. There's a slight astringency, a slight bitterness, a hardness there on the finish. Again, it's not. I'm not warming to it. Can't argue with the quality though. Can't argue with the fact that it's showing plenty of distillery character. So it has to win on that kind of merit, I suppose. And this is the thing, when you're evaluating a whiskey, you kind of, to a certain extent, and I've said it many times, is you kind of put your kind of personal preference to one side to a certain extent and evaluate it for what it is. You know, then at the end of the day you can say, well, do I actually physically, you know, like this whiskey? I mean, if I'm judging this as in a competition, then the like bit kind of like has to take a back seat, because you have to judge it on its qualities. And so, you know, judging it on its qualities, it's a pretty good whiskey, it's a pretty good cask. Do I like it? Not really. Little bit of a sulphury note there now, it has to be said. I mean, this is my big issue with sulphur. I have a nose that really picks up sulphur. It's a sort of, I suppose, as much as it is a sort of a quality, it's a bane, that has to be said. Because some people probably won't pick it up, but there is a distinct sulphur note there. Whether that's actually spirit sulphur or cask sulphur, difficult to say. But it's definitely there, and it's definitely sort of, it's kind of just, you know, sort of saying, you know, it's kind of, I'm not loving this even more. Anyway, let's see what it passes like. Pomegranate, it's sort of, yeah, okay, it's alright. It's gone a little bit watery, it's gone a little bit vague, it has to be said. It's soft, it's softer, I probably should say. It's sort of, by saying soft, I kind of like imply that it's all wonderfully and soft and sort of fluffy, and but it's still Macduff at the end of the day, and it's hard work. Yeah, it's hard work. On to the Leche, so 12 years old. Let's see what the nose gives on this then, shall we? That's a nice nose. Intense, high-toned, herbal, slightly meaty, smoke, peat, dried grape, honey. oh, there's a slight struck match note there, just kind of lingering in the background. I think there's enough going on to kind of detract. You know, it is a fault. It has to be said. You know, if one is judging and sort of scoring, you go, yep, definite fault there. Do I like this nose? I kind of do, you know. It's kind of, I suppose, going against all the sorts, going against the grain to a certain extent. I like the fact that sort of modern Tobermory Leche is a lot cleaner, but that sulphury note kind of gives it a slight dirtiness on the edge, without being overly dirty. If you kind of follow me on this, I know it's I know I'm a contradiction at times, you know. I bang on about being clean and then I go, oh, I like that slight bit of dirtiness. Yeah, okay. A little bit of vanilla as well, a bit of marzipan. Yeah, it's getting a little bit biscuity now. I mean, I like this. I mean, I kind of like it because it's clean modern Tobermory with a bit of a throwback note to it. So, yeah, okay. Let's see what that's like. Nice progression. Again, opens up with the cask. I'm getting that sort of slightly honeyed, Madeira-y, slightly biscuity Madeira kind of character. Meaty smokiness coming through on the mid palate. No sulphur, I hasten to add, on the palate. And then the smokiness, the meatiness kind of comes back on the finish. That's really nice. That's got a lovely progression. And again, it's kind of, you know, how leche should be. It's modern leche, it's clean leche, it's that smoked meat sort of smokiness, which is, you know, just lovely, absolutely lovely. I mean, you know, how many times have you heard me say leche is lovely? But there's, as we seem to get sort of further away from the bad old days, that does seem to be a, you know, could they move out of the axis of evil? Ooh, now there's a question, isn't it? Anyway, fresher, saltier, less cask notes, more astringency, more citrus coastal astringency on the nose now. Not quite so peated. Sulphur note seems to have gone. Happy days. See what the palate's like. A little sweeter, a little bit more cask notes, less of the meaty peatiness. I personally prefer it neat. I think even with the slight sulphur blemish on the nose, I think I would prefer to drink that neat than diluted. A pleasant finish, or yeah, 89 quid. Yeah, I mean, it's expensive. You do have to ask the question, why is it's a bit like Kalila, isn't it? So why is Kalila and Tobermory sort of such variable prices? Why can it be relatively inexpensive one minute and stupidly expensive the other minute? I mean, you know, okay, we kind of live in this kind of slightly mad world at the moment, and it would appear that sort of like whiskey pricing is kind of I mean, has there ever been a bloody rhyme or reason for whiskey pricing? I mean, it's a bit of an inexact science, isn't it? You can, you know, you buy the cask, you sit on it for a few years, and how do you quantify it? I mean, it's not like, you know, I suppose, you know, you have warehousing space, you know how much you're being charged warehousing space, so you can kind of like, you know, I mean, if it's a bit different with regards to sort of warehousing sort of cases of wine or whiskey, because you're charged by the case. I don't know about casks. Are you charged by the cask? Possibly. So you have obviously a fixed amount of money that you know you're spending for the storage of said cask. So yeah, okay, that's going to remain the same. But the point being is that you bought it, say 5 years ago, for example. Yes, all right, we know the price of whiskey's gone up. You're going to be making a bit more money. Maybe some people are cashing in on that. I don't know. Difficult to say, not being, you know, because I'm in the, you know, the wine industry to a certain extent, rather than the sort of, you know, cask storage industry. I don't quite know the nuances and how that sort of works, but obviously when you buy in wine, for argument's sake, most merchants will kind of obviously work out the price at the time of purchase and at the time it kind of enters your warehouse, and generally speaking, it doesn't actually change. You know, you don't kind of put the price, well, you may well put the price up with regards to sort of like, you know, if you add an element for storage and all that kind of stuff. But what I'm trying to say is, it's sort of like, why is there such variability between the price of things like Guerilla and Tobermory, but when it doesn't seem to make a great deal of sense? You can pick, you know, bottlings of either of those two distilleries up relatively expensive. I'm talking about youngish, you know, sort of 8 to 12 years old kind of stuff, and then some are sort of cheaper than others, and it just doesn't seem to, there doesn't seem to be a kind of like a raison d'etre for it at the end of the day, is what I'm trying to say. But anyway, no detracting from this particular bottling. Let's get back to what we were talking about. That is a lovely bottling of Leche at the end of the day. Okay, so on to the final bottling of the day. This is the Stoisha. This is 7 years old. Let's see what the nose gives us. Good intensity, quite ferny, herbal, peaty, slightly medicinal, lovely intensity. Not getting a lot of rum cask, it has to be said. Okay, maybe there's a slight sweetness there. A little bit of white fruit. I mean, that's a good nose. That's a lovely nose, actually. And I would have liked to have seen a bit more. I mean, maybe was it a first? Yeah, it was a first fill cask as well. I'm quite surprised, but then it just goes to show you that obviously the distillery character is well and truly hammering the cask into the background. Let's see what the pass up. It's a bit more herbal sweetness, rummy herbal sweetness on the palate. Again, really salty, fresh, crisp, quite peaty, salty, intense. Doesn't need really any water. It's got a great length, it has to be said. And that kind of like distillery character just blows the cask away, really, on the finish. The cask never really, well, it kind of kicks off at the beginning, but it never really kind of gets anywhere to a certain extent, but it just kind of adds this slight sweetness, and I like that. That's really impressive. It's funny, isn't it, how Stoisha does seem to kind of like get away with being bottled quite young, a bit like Guerilla to a certain extent. It just has that vibrancy, that intensity, that sort of peatiness when it's young. It will be interesting to see. I mean, I've not come across, what's the old, I probably haven't tasted a Stoisha that's older than about 10 years old, I wouldn't have thought. So it'd be nice to see if anybody's going to sit on a cask for sort of like, you know, 12, 15, 18 years to see how it actually kind of like develops with time. But it's just, it's great fun when it's young, it has to be said. Lovely, really nicely nosed. A drop of water is kind of giving it a little bit more sweetness, although dried fruit don't really, again, you know, the rumminess is not so evident, but there's that sort of subtle sweetness which is being added to the sort of coastal salty intensity. I like that. That's a lovely nose. Let's see what that's like. Again, lovely balance, kicks off sweetly. You could argue that sweetness is a little bit sugary, maybe, but that sort of herbal medicinal intensity kind of kicks in on the mid palate and really sort of sees it through. But the wine cask kind of hangs in there. It's kind of keeping that underlying sweetness. That's gorgeous. That is a lovely, lovely whiskey. I love that. I love the sort of the young intensity of it, and I love the balance of it. And I think that is that's pretty special. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Firstly, a big thank you to Paul from Brave New Spirits for the samples for today's episode of the show. Again, I hope I've not disappointed anybody with my review. I think I've been fair, a bit harsh maybe at times. Anyway, the Auchentoshan. I think it was just a bit too heavy on the cask, not enough distillery character, and I like I said, I often wonder why bother with Auchentoshan and doing that kind of thing to it. The Royal Brackla, do you know, I ummed and ahed about this when I tasted it. I was kind of, initially it was sort of like too heavy on the wine cask, and I retasted it and it's kind of, well, yeah, I think the balance is just about there. It's interesting. You don't often see very much in the way of Royal Brackla out and about these days, and yeah, okay, I can live with that. I can go with that. Deanston. Well, you can't argue that it didn't display distillery character. Not really my kind of cup of tea, it has to be said. It's going to have to be a bloody special cask of Deanston for me to go, ooh, I want to stock that. And I have actually stocked Deanston. No, I shouldn't say that. I haven't personally stocked Deanston. The company I work for has occasionally stocked a Deanston. You know, I personally haven't, but yeah, anyway, moving on. The Macduff, yeah, okay, I can't. Probably you could say the same about the Macduff as the Deanston. Certainly displayed plenty of distillery character, which you can't argue about, you know. Whether you love that distillery character or not, of course, is a secondary question, but it certainly displayed plenty of distillery character. The Ledaig, yeah, I thought that was really good. Yeah, all right, there was a little bit of a sulphury note on the nose when it was undiluted, and you know, so I can forgive it, because I think, you know, on the whole, you look at the overall picture of it, and I think it was a pretty bloody good cask, you know, in essence, and I wouldn't sort of let that slight sulphury note, you know, detract from that. And the Stoisha, yeah, young peated Booner. What's not to like at the end of the day? Well, if you don't like peated malt, you're never going to like it, but I mean, I did, and I thought that was really impressive, and I'd quite happily put it on the shelf if I was a retailer. So there you have it. So big thank you to Brave New Spirits for the samples for this week's episode of the show and last week's episode of the show. Hopefully I've not disappointed anybody with my personal reviews, and as I said, you know, this week and last week and every week, you know, this is just my personal opinion. The wonderful thing about whiskey is that everybody has their own opinion, and you may well like something that I wasn't so keen on, and vice versa. I would like to say that if you bought whiskey from a certain emporium, then you couldn't argue with the quality of what you purchased. It's all about taste at the end of the day. And yeah, that's this week's episode of the show in the bag. I hope you've enjoyed it. Not really else to say apart from good afternoon and good dramming.
Стоит под дубом на краю ямы и зовет уйти с его ночами. О, дитя, не